Victorian era, which saw rapid industrialization with significant advancement in technology, manufacturing, and transportation, such as the rise of railways and the steam engine. During this time, Britain became the most powerful empire in the world, with vast colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. But at the same time, the Victorians did some strange things. So today, we will see what strange things the Victorian did at that time. Before I start, if you are new to the channel and love history, definitely subscribe the channel and press the bell icon. Thank you. Well, the first one is too weird. Post-mortem photography was a practice that became popular during the Victorian era, especially in the mid to late 1800s. It involved taking photographs of people who had recently passed away. These photos were often made as a way to remember loved ones, as photography was still a relatively new technology and many families didn't have other keepsakes. Cameras were expensive, so most people didn't get portraits taken while they were alive. After someone passed away, a photograph was one of the few lasting memories they could have. Death and mourning were viewed differently back then. People believed that taking photographs of the deceased would help preserve their memory and keep them alive in some way. Since many postmortem photos were taken when the person had already passed away, the body was often posed to look as natural as possible. Photographers would carefully arrange the person, sometimes even propping their eyes to open or placing them in lifelike positions, such as sitting up or holding objects. Children or babies were often photographed in their parents' arms or posed as if sleeping peacefully. In the early days of photography, cameras required long exposure times, so people had to stay still for minutes or even longer to get a clear image. This made it hard to capture a living subject because they would move. Since the deceased were still, their photos were clearer than those of living people at the time. By the early 20th century, advances in photography technology like faster film and smaller cameras made it easier to take photos of the living. As society's views on death and mourning changed, postmortem photography became less common and eventually faded away. In today's world, postmortem photography is often seen as strange or morbid, but during the Victorian era, it was a way to honor and remember those who had passed. Tight corsets were an important part of fashion for women in the Victorian era. The corset was a fitted garment worn around the torso to shape the body into a desired silhouette. During this period, the ideal body shape was an hourglass figure, small waist, large hips, and a full chest. The Victorian ideal of a tiny waist meant that women often wore corsets very tightly, sometimes dangerously so. This practice could cause difficulty in breathing, resting movement, and even harm internal organs over time. In extreme cases, tight corsets could lead to fainting, deformed ribs, and long-term health problems. Despite these risks, corsets were worn by women to conform to the fashion standards of the time. Corsets were not only about fashion, they symbolized social status and femininity. Wealthier women could afford more elaborate, decorated corsets, while poorer women had simpler versions. The tight corset was a symbol of a woman's role in society as delicate and controlled, and it was an essential part of their daily clothing. During this time, people were fascinated by science and technology, and they created many strange inventions. Some were practical, others downright bizarre, but all reflected the spirit of experimentation of the time. Anti-garrote collars. Crime was a concern in Victorian cities, and mugging was common. To protect themselves, some people wore spiked metal collars or ones reinforced with steel to prevent strangulation. They looked odd but offered peace of mind. Another bizarre invention was coffins with bells. Victorians had a fear of being buried alive, so some coffins were equipped with a bell system. If someone was actually buried but still alive, they could ring the bell to alert others. This invention was called a safety coffin. During the Victorian era, many children in Britain were forced to work in factories due to poverty. This was a time when the country was industrialized rapidly and there was a high demand for cheap labor. Families were often very poor and needed extra income to survive. Sending their children to work was a necessity. There were no strict laws requiring children to go to school, so many worked instead of learning. Children were small and nimble, which made them suitable for tasks like fixing machinery or crawling into tight spaces. Children worked 10 to 16 hours a day, 3 days a week. Factory owners and overseers often punished children harshly for being late or making mistakes. In 1833, the first Factory Act was passed, banning children under 9 from working in textile factories and limiting hours for older children. Later acts gradually improved conditions, but enforcement was slow. During the Victorian era, beauty standards were incredibly high, and people have resorted to strange and dangerous methods to meet them. One of the most shocking practices was the use of arsenic for beauty treatments. Arsenic is a toxic substance that can poison the body, but back then, people didn't fully understand its dangers. Back then, science and medicine were not as advanced as they are today. Many people believed in advertisement rather than medical advice. Beauty products were not regulated, so companies could sell dangerous items without consequences. Social pressure to look beautiful was so strong that women were willing to risk their health. As the dangers of arsenic became more widely known, its use in beauty products declined. The introduction of laws regulating cosmetics and better public awareness helped end the deadly trends. The use of arsenic for beauty is a grim reminder of how far people have gone in pursuit of societal beauty standards, often at the expense of their health. During the Victorian era, freak shows were a popular form of entertainment, where people with unusual physical appearances or abilities were displayed for the public to see. Freak shows featured people labeled as freaks because they looked or acted differently from what society considered normal. These individuals might have had medical conditions, physical disabilities, or extraordinary talents. Some freaks were treated like celebrities and earned a good income, gaining independence and even fame. Others were exploited and forced to perform under poor conditions. Many were taken from their homes or families as children and had little control over their lives. While some performers enjoyed their work, others felt dehumanized, as audience often gawked at them as objects of curiosity rather than as people. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, freak shows began to decline. And the last one, the Victorian era was a time of strict social rules, and this extended to how people ate and behaved at the dining table. While some food habits were rooted in etiquette, others were outright odd by today's standards. Victorians were very particular about using the right utensils. They had special forks, knives, and spoons for almost every type of food. From oysters to asparagus, using the wrong utensil could mark you as uncultured. Eating too much meat was thought to overstimulate emotions or even lead to immortality. Raw vegetables were considered dangerous because they were thought to harbor bad airs. Cooking everything was a must. Drinking milk and beer together was a common health tip to boost strength. Proper table manners demanded silence while eating. Speaking or making noises like slurping or chewing loudly was considered very rude. Even sneezing at the table could embarrass someone in polite company. Victorians loved guillotine-based dishes, both sweet and savory. They used molded jelly to create intricate, colorful presentations. It wasn't just dessert. Jellies could contain meats, vegetables, or even fish. The more complex and decorative the jelly, the fancier the host seemed. So far today, don't forget to tell us how you felt. What do you think about Victorian era? I really want to know. Let me know in the comments and tell me which Victorian era thing you want to hear about next. Thanks a lot for watching the full video. See you in the next video. Stay well.